Eleanor Mitchell stood at the window of her modest apartment, watching the rain trace patterns down the glass as she clutched another rejection letter in her hand. At 34, with 2 advanced degrees and a teaching career cut short by her husband's death, she had become something of an anomaly in the small town of Riverbrook, Texas. "We're looking for someone with less academic inclination," the letter read. The 5th such response this month. In a town where most women her age were raising families and hosting dinner parties, Eleanor's PhD in literature and master's in education made her an intimidating prospect for most employers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Little did she know that 50 miles away, in a sprawling ranch house overlooking the Texas Hill Country, Jackson Blackwell was at his wits' end, trying to figure out what to do with his brilliant but troubled 14-year-old son, a boy who had driven away 4 tutors in the past year alone. Eleanor's apartment was sparsely furnished, but lined with bookshelves that reached from floor to ceiling. Books were her comfort, her escape, and the last connection to David, her late husband. 3 years had passed since the car accident that took him from her, leaving her alone in a town that had always viewed their relationship with suspicion. The local boy who went off to college and returned with a wife too smart for her own. Good. She placed the rejection letter on her kitchen table next to the stack of bills that had been growing steadily over the past few months. Her savings were dwindling, and the substitute teaching positions that had sustained her were becoming harder to secure. The principal at Riverbrook Elementary had been sympathetic but direct. "The parents find you intimidating, Eleanor. They think you make their children feel inadequate." How ironic that the very education she and David had sacrificed for was now the thing keeping her from building a new life. She had moved to Riverbrook for David and had planned to start a family here. Now she was stuck, too attached to the memories to leave, too qualified for the opportunities available. The phone rang, breaking her from her thoughts. It was Maggie, her only real friend in town and the local diner owner. "Eleanor, honey, I might have something for you," Maggie said, her voice tinged with excitement. "There's a man in the diner right now asking about tutors. Not just any tutor. He needs someone with serious academic credentials." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat, but experience had taught her to temper her expectations. "What kind of tutoring?" "Private. For his son. The man's name is Jackson Blackwell. He owns the Diamond B Ranch out past Crestview. Apparently his boy is some kind of genius, but won't stay in traditional school. He's been through tutors like tissues during allergy season." Eleanor had heard whispers about the Diamond B and its reclusive owner, widowed several years ago, just like her, a cattle baron who'd expanded into oil and technology investments. He rarely came to town, and when he did, he kept to himself. "I don't know, Maggie," Eleanor sighed. "Sounds like a difficult situation." "Difficult means they'll pay well," Maggie retorted. "And honey, forgive me for saying so, but you can't afford to be picky right now. Besides, he specifically asked for someone with advanced degrees, said the boy needs intellectual stimulation beyond what most teachers can provide." Against her better judgment, Eleanor found herself agreeing to meet with Mr. Blackwell. An hour later, she sat across from him in a quiet corner of Maggie's diner, fighting the urge to fidget under his intense gaze. Jackson Blackwell was not what she had expected. In her mind, a cattle baron should have been weathered and rough around the edges, but the man before her, while undeniably rugged, possessed a quiet refinement. Tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair and eyes the color of a stormy sky, he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "Mrs. Mitchell," he began, his voice deep and measured, "I appreciate you meeting with me on such short notice." "It's Dr. Mitchell, actually," she corrected gently, then immediately regretted it. This was exactly the kind of thing that put people off, but rather than frown, Blackwell's expression shifted to one of increased interest. Dr. Mitchell, even better. Your friend mentioned you have a PhD in literature and a master's in education? Eleanor nodded, surprised by his reaction. Yes, I completed my doctorate at Columbia before my husband and I moved back to his hometown. And you've been teaching? I was a professor at the community college in Austin before. She paused, the familiar pang of grief momentarily stealing her words. Before my husband passed away. Since then, I've been substituting at the local schools, but it's been challenging to find a permanent position. Blackwell studied her with unexpected understanding. Small towns can be wary of people who stand out. For a moment, Eleanor was taken aback by his perception. She had expected judgment, not empathy. My son, Ethan, is 14, he continued. Brilliant according to every assessment, but increasingly difficult to manage in traditional educational settings. He's been tested at a college sophomore level in mathematics and science, but he's also deeply interested in literature and history. The problem is, he's bored and restless in school, which leads to behavior problems, which leads to suspension or expulsion. Eleanor's educator instincts kicked in. Has he been evaluated for everything? Blackwell cut in. He's not on the spectrum, not ADHD, just extraordinarily gifted and equally stubborn. And he hesitated, struggling with the loss of his mother 6 years ago. The mention of this shared experience, the loss of a spouse, created an unexpected connection between them. Eleanor found herself nodding in understanding. I've tried local teachers, but they're quickly overwhelmed. I've brought in tutors from Austin and San Antonio, but they don't last. Ethan needs someone who can challenge him intellectually while also providing structure and consistency. Mr. Blackwell, I'm not sure I'm the right person, Eleanor began, cautiously. I specialized in undergraduate education, not gifted adolescents. With all due respect, Dr. Mitchell, I think you might be exactly the right person. His gaze was direct, unwavering. You understand loss. You're clearly intelligent enough to keep pace with Ethan, and frankly, from what your friend tells me, you need the work as much as I need someone with your qualifications. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush at this last comment. Pride made her want to deny it, but practicality won out. What exactly would the position entail? Full-time private tutoring. You would live at the ranch during the week, with weekends free if you choose to return to town. The position includes room and board, plus a salary that I believe you'll find generous. He named a figure that made Eleanor's eyes widen. It was more than she had made as a professor. That's substantial, she managed. I'm not just paying you for education, Dr. Mitchell. I'm paying for someone who won't give up on my son. Something in his voice, a hint of desperation beneath the confident exterior, touched Eleanor. May I ask what happened to the previous tutors? A slight grimace crossed Blackwell's face. Various incidents. One found her car filled with harmless snakes. Another had all his teaching materials replaced with comic books. The third couldn't handle Ethan's constant questioning of her knowledge and qualifications. The fourth simply disappeared in the night, leaving a note about impossible working conditions. Despite herself, Eleanor felt a smile tugging at her lips. The boy sounded challenging, but intriguing. And what makes you think I would fare any better? For the first time, Blackwell's stern demeanor softened slightly, because you have something the others didn't. And what's that? The look of someone who doesn't scare easily, someone who's already faced the worst life can throw at them and is still standing. He leaned forward. Plus, Maggie says you're the most stubborn woman she's ever met, which I suspect might be exactly what Ethan needs. Eleanor couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her. Maggie wasn't wrong. I'll need to meet Ethan before making any decisions, she said firmly. Blackwell nodded, seemingly pleased by her condition. Of course. Can you come to the ranch tomorrow? See the facilities, meet Ethan, and then decide. As Eleanor considered the offer, her gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, and a patch of blue sky was visible between the clouds. Maybe, just maybe, this was the opportunity she'd been waiting for. Not just for financial stability, but for purpose. Yes, she said, extending her hand across the table. I'll meet with you tomorrow. As they shook hands, Eleanor couldn't help but notice how Blackwell's grip was firm but not overpowering, how his eyes seemed to hold secrets he wasn't ready to share, and how, for the first time in months, she felt a flutter of something like hope in her chest. What she didn't know then was that the Diamond B Ranch held far more mysterious than she could imagine, and that Ethan Blackwell would test not just her academic knowledge, but every ounce of patience and compassion she possessed. The Diamond B Ranch loomed larger than Eleanor had imagined. As her aging sedan crunched up the gravel driveway, she took in the sprawling main house, a blend of traditional ranch architecture and modern additions, with floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the morning sun. The property stretched for miles, in every direction, dotted with grazing cattle and bisected by a winding creek where willows dipped their branches into clear water. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Eleanor parked beside a collection of far more expensive vehicles and checked her appearance in the rearview mirror. She'd opted for professional but approachable, dark slacks, a blue blouse and minimal jewelry. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple twist, a few strands already escaping to frame her face. The outfit had been perfect for her interview at Riverbrook High last month, though it hadn't gotten her the job. Perhaps today would be different. A ranch hand directed her to the main house, where Jackson Blackwell himself opened the door. Today, he wore dark jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle, a reminder that despite his business success, he still worked the land. "Dr. Mitchell," he greeted her, stepping aside to let her enter. "Thank you for coming." The interior of the house surprised her. Rather than the rustic decor she'd expected, the space was modern and bright, with clean lines and thoughtfully chosen art. Most striking were the bookshelves, similar to her own apartment but on a grander scale, lining entire walls, and filled with everything from classics to contemporary works, scientific journals to poetry collections. "Your home is beautiful," Eleanor said, her eyes drawn to a first-edition Hemingway displayed in a glass case. "My late wife's influence," Blackwell explained, following her gaze. "Sophia was an architect. She redesigned the house after we married." A flash of pain crossed his features before he masked it. "Would you like some coffee before I show you around?" In the spacious kitchen, he surprised her again by preparing the coffee himself rather than delegating to staff. As he worked, Eleanor noticed photographs displayed on a nearby shelf. A striking, dark-haired woman with laughing eyes must have been Sophia. Beside her in most photos was a younger version of Jackson and a small boy with his mother's smile and his father's intense gaze. "That's Ethan," Blackwell said, handing her a mug. "Before—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "How did she—" Eleanor began, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. That's much too personal." "Cancer," he answered anyway, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of old pain. "Diagnosed when Ethan was 6, gone within 2 years. Aggressive type, caught too late." He looked at her directly. "And your husband?" "Car accident. 3 years ago, rainy night, the truck driver fell asleep at the wheel." Eleanor was surprised by her own candor. She rarely discussed David's death, finding most people's responses either awkwardly pitiful or filled with platitudes. Blackwell simply nodded. No empty words, just acknowledgement of a shared understanding. Ethan took his mother's death hard. He continued after a moment. She homeschooled him for a while when she was first diagnosed. He was already reading at a high school level by then. After she passed, he sighed. That's when the troubles at school began. Where is Ethan now? Eleanor asked. In his workshop. It's part of the tour. He gestured for her to follow him. The ranch house, Blackwell explained as they walked, contained the main living areas, his office and several guest rooms. A separate building housed what he called the Learning Center, a fully equipped classroom, library, science lab, and art studio. Sophia believed in holistic education, he explained. Science and math were important, but so were literature, history, and the arts. Ethan has inherited her wide-ranging curiosity. The workshop turned out to be a converted barn behind the main house. As they approached, Eleanor heard the unmistakable strains of Tchaikovsky's violin concerto in D major, filtering through the walls. "He plays?" she asked, impressed. "Among other things," Blackwell replied with a hint of pride. When they entered, the music abruptly cut off. At the center of the space stood a boy who bore a striking resemblance to the woman in the photographs. With the same dark, wavy hair and delicate features, though his eyes were his father's, stormy grey and watchful. "Ethan," Blackwell said, "this is Dr. Eleanor Mitchell. She's here about the tutoring position." The boy's expression shifted from surprise to swift assessment. Eleanor felt herself being evaluated and categorized in seconds. Around him, the workshop was a testament to a mind that refused to be contained. One wall covered with mathematical equations, another with detailed sketches of mechanical designs. A half-disassembled drone lay on one table, while another held what appeared to be chemistry experiments. Bookshelves crammed with volumes on everything from quantum physics to Russian literature lined another wall, and in the corner sat a violin. On its stand, another one? Ethan finally spoke, his voice caught between childhood and adolescence. What happened to Mr. Peterson? Mr. Peterson decided his talents were better suited elsewhere, Blackwell said evenly. You mean after I corrected his analysis of Macbeth's tragic flaw and he threw Shakespeare across the room? Ethan's tone was innocent, but his eyes gleamed with challenge. Eleanor bit back a smile. Which flaw did you identify? The question seemed to catch Ethan off guard. He'd clearly expected a different reaction. I argued that it wasn't just ambition, which is what Peterson insisted on. I said it was his inability to distinguish between reality and fantasy once he starts down his path. Peterson said I was overcomplicating on things. An interesting interpretation, Eleanor nodded. Have you read A.C. Bradley's analysis? He makes a somewhat similar argument. Now, Ethan looked genuinely surprised. You've read Bradley's Shakespearean tragedy? I wrote my master's thesis on evolutionary interpretations of Shakespeare's tragic heroes. Eleanor shrugged. Bradley's work was foundational, though somewhat dated in methodology. For a brief moment, Ethan seemed at a loss for words. Then his eyes narrowed. What do you think of Harold Bloom's assertion that Shakespeare invented the modern conception of humanity? Provocative but overstated, Eleanor replied without hesitation. Bloom was brilliant but occasionally prone to critical hyperbole. The boy's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile before he suppressed it. He turned to his father. She's better than the last one. High praise, Blackwell said dryly. Would you mind if Dr. Mitchell and I continue our conversation? She hasn't decided to take the position yet. Why not? Ethan asked, his attention swinging back to Eleanor with renewed intensity. Is our money not good enough for you? Ethan, his father warned. It's all right, Eleanor assured Blackwell before addressing Ethan directly. It's not about the money. It's about whether I'm the right fit for what you need. I don't want to waste your time or mine if it's not going to work. And how will you decide that? Ethan challenged. by asking questions, observing, getting a sense of what you're looking for in your education. She paused, then added, and by determining whether you're actually interested in learning or just in driving away another tutor. The directness of her statement seemed to impress both Blackwells. Father and son exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. "I'll show Dr. Mitchell the Learning Center," Jackson said finally. "You can join us if you wish." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I'll come. Someone needs to point out the deficiencies in your sales pitch." As they walked to the next building, Eleanor sensed Ethan studying her. "Columbia, right?" he asked abruptly. "Dad said you got your PhD there." "Yes. How did you know?" "Your laptop bag. It has a worn Columbia sticker on it, and you don't strike me as the type to advertise something you're not proud of." His observation was astute. "What was your dissertation on?" "Narrative echoes, trauma and repetition in post-war American literature." Ethan's eyebrows rose. "Sounds depressing." Eleanor laughed, surprising herself. "It had its moments, but it was mainly about how writers use structural repetition to convey traumatic experiences that resist direct narration. So, patterns as a way to say what can't be said directly?" His quick comprehension impressed her. "Exactly." The learning center proved to be even more extensive than Eleanor had anticipated. The main room was a split-level space with a traditional classroom setup on one side and comfortable reading nooks on the other. Adjacent rooms included a fully equipped science lab, a small art studio, and a technology center with high-end computers. "This is remarkable," Eleanor said honestly. "Most schools would envy this setup." "Sophia designed it," Blackwell explained, that familiar shadow crossing his face. "She believed learning environments should be both functional and inspiring." "Mum said classrooms should breathe," Ethan added quietly, running his hand along a bookshelf. "She hated those schoolrooms with no windows and fluorescent lights." The mention of his mother softened Ethan's demeanor. As they continued the tour, he pointed out features his mother had specifically designed: the skylights positioned to maximize natural light, the acoustics that allowed for both concentration and collaboration. After the tour, they returned to the main house where Jackson suggested Ethan show Eleanor the curriculum materials while he made some calls. Eleanor suspected it was a deliberate move to give her time alone with the boy. In the library, Ethan pulled out binders containing detailed lesson plans and educational materials. Some commercial, others clearly developed by previous tutors. "None of them got it right," Ethan said, flipping through pages with barely concealed disdain. "They either talked down to me or tried to cram college-level material down my throat without any context." "What would getting it right look like to you?" Eleanor asked. The question seemed to surprise him. "I don't know. Challenging, but not pretentious. Peterson kept trying to impress me with how much he knew, instead of helping me learn what I wanted to know." "And what do you want to know?" Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. "How things connect. Why do some ideas survive for centuries while others disappear? Why do humans keep making the same mistakes throughout history?" He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "And practical stuff too. Engineering, coding, things I can actually use." "That sounds reasonable," Eleanor said. "What about your father? What does he want from your education?" "For me to be normal," Ethan replied, a bitter edge to his voice. "To stop getting kicked out of schools and embarrassing him in front of his friends." Eleanor doubted that was accurate, but decided not to challenge it directly. "Has he said that?" "He doesn't have to." Before Eleanor could respond, Jackson returned. The three of them moved to the kitchen, where Mrs. Ramirez, the housekeeper, had prepared lunch. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than Eleanor had expected. Ethan, despite his initial wariness, asked thoughtful questions about her academic background and teaching philosophy, Jackson spoke about his hopes for Ethan's education, not just academic achievement, but developing the resilience and judgment needed for adulthood. After lunch, Jackson suggested Eleanor might want to see the rest of the property. Ethan excused himself, claiming homework from his online courses needed attention, though Eleanor suspected he simply wanted time to process their meeting. Jackson drove her around the vast ranch in his truck, pointing out features of the operation, the cattle herds, the sustainable grazing practices he'd implemented, the solar array that powered much of the property. As they drove, he filled in more details about the position. The previous tutors lived in the guest house, he explained, pointing to a charming cottage near a small pond. It's fully furnished with its own kitchen and laundry. You'd have complete in privacy when not teaching. It's lovely, Eleanor said, admiring the stone exterior and the flower beds that surrounded it. Ethan's schedule has been flexible, but I'd like more structure. Generally 9 to 3 for formal lessons, Monday through Friday, with supervised independent study in the evenings. Weekends would be yours, though we sometimes take trips that would be educational opportunities. Museums, universities, cultural events. Those would be optional for you, with additional compensation. They drove a bit farther, cresting a hill that offered a breathtaking view of the entire property. Jackson stopped the truck, and they sat in silence for a moment, taking in the panorama. So, I ask you something candid, Dr. Mitchell? Of course. Why did you agree to meet with me? From what Maggie said, you're significantly overqualified for tutoring a 14-year-old, even one as advanced as Ethan. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. Initially, financial necessity. I won't pretend otherwise. She gazed out at the landscape. But after meeting Ethan, he reminds me of why I became an educator in the first place. He has that rare combination of intelligence and curiosity that makes teaching rewarding. Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. And does the position interest you now that you've seen what it entails? It does, Eleanor admitted. But I have concerns, such as, Ethan has driven away 4 tutors already. What happens when he inevitably tests me? Because he will. A faint smile touched Jackson's lips. He absolutely will. The question is, can you handle it? I believe so, but I'd need your support. Clear boundaries, consistent consequences when those boundaries are crossed, and no undermining my authority, even if he complains. Jackson's eyebrows rose slightly at her directness. That sounds reasonable. And I'd want to implement my own curriculum tailored to Ethan's interests, but ensuring comprehensive coverage of core subjects. Also reasonable. Finally, Eleanor said, meeting his gaze directly, I'd need to know that you're committed to this approach. That you won't pull the plug at the first sign of resistance from Ethan, or the first disagreement between us about teaching methods. Jackson studied her for a long moment before answering. Dr. Mitchell, I've spent the last 6 years trying to give my son what he needs. I've hired experts, enrolled him in prestigious programs, and considered boarding schools in Europe. He sighed, a sound heavy with frustration and worry. What I've realized is that Ethan doesn't need another institution or program. He needs someone who sees him, not just his intelligence or his difficulty, but him. His words hung in the air between them. Eleanor understood what he was asking, not just for academic instruction, but for someone who could connect with a brilliant, wounded boy who had lost his mother too young. When would you want me to start? She asked finally. Relief flickered across Jackson's face. Is Monday too soon? 4 days to pack up her apartment and prepare for a complete change in her life. Under normal circumstances, Eleanor would have called it impossibly rushed. But her circumstances were far from normal, and something about this opportunity, challenging as it would undoubtedly be, felt right in a way nothing had since David's death. Monday works, she agreed. As they drove back to the main house, Eleanor's mind was already racing with ideas for Ethan's education, interdisciplinary projects that would engage his wide-ranging interests, reading lists that would challenge without overwhelming, assessments that would measure genuine understanding rather than rote memorization. When they returned, Ethan was waiting on the porch, trying to appear casual, but clearly anxious about the outcome of their conversation. "Dr. Mitchell has agreed to take the position," Jackson announced as they approached. "She'll be starting on Monday." Ethan's expression was a complex mixture of relief, wariness, and something like hope. "Really?" he asked, looking at Eleanor. "Really," she confirmed. "Though I should warn you, I have very different expectations than your previous tutors." Such as treating education as a collaboration rather than a competition. "I'm not here to prove I'm smarter than you, Ethan. I'm here to help you develop your own intelligence in ways that will serve you throughout your life." The boy considered this, his sharp mind visibly processing her words. "And if I decide I don't want to collaborate?" Eleanor smiled. "Then we'll have a problem, but I suspect we'll find a way through it." Something shifted in Ethan's demeanor, a barely perceptible relaxation, as though he'd been bracing for a different answer and was cautiously pleased by the one he'd received. "I guess we'll see on Monday," he said, but there was less challenge in his voice than before. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Jackson walked her to her car. "Thank you for taking this chance," he said quietly. "I know it's not a conventional position." "Very little about my life has been conventional lately," Eleanor replied. "Maybe this is exactly where I need to be." Driving back toward town, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The coming weeks would undoubtedly bring challenges: Ethan's testing of boundaries, adjusting to life on the ranch, navigating her relationship with Jackson Blackwell, who remained something of an enigma despite their conversations. Yet, for the first time in 3 years, she felt a sense of purpose stronger than mere survival. Whether this opportunity was a new beginning or simply another chapter in her story remained to be seen. But Eleanor Mitchell was finally ready to turn the page. Monday arrived with a Texas thunderstorm that drummed against the roof of Eleanor's rented U-Haul as she made her final trip to the Diamond B. The weekend had passed in a whirlwind of packing, paperwork, and goodbyes, though there were fewer of those than she might have expected after 3 years in Riverbrook. Only Maggie had seemed genuinely sad to see her go, pressing a tin of homemade cookies into her hands with a whisper, "Give that boy hell, honey." By the time Eleanor pulled up to the guest cottage, the rain had softened to a gentle patter. Jackson emerged from the main house with an umbrella, jogging over to help her. "Welcome," he said, taking a box from her arms. "Not the sunniest start, but the forecast says it'll clear by afternoon." The cottage exceeded her expectations. Warm wood floors and exposed beams gave it a rustic charm, while modern appliances and thoughtful touches made it immediately comfortable. A desk by the window overlooked the pond, where ducks huddled beneath a weeping willow. Bookshelves, of course there were bookshelves, lined one wall of the living room, mostly empty and waiting for her collection. "Sophia designed this too," Jackson explained, setting down the box. "It was originally meant for visiting family, but we never had many visitors after." He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ramirez stocked the kitchen, but let us know if there's anything specific you need." "It's perfect," Eleanor assured him, genuinely touched by the care evident in the preparation. A vase of fresh wildflowers sat on the kitchen table, and the bed was made up with crisp linens and extra blankets folded at the foot. "Ethan's eager to get started," Jackson said, his tone suggesting eager might be a generous interpretation. "Once you're settled, we can review the schedule I've drafted. It's flexible, of course." Eleanor had planned to spend the day unpacking and preparing for her first official session with Ethan the following morning, but something in Jackson's expression, a barely concealed anxiety, made her reconsider. Actually, if Ethan is available this afternoon, I'd like to start with an informal assessment. She smiled reassuringly. Nothing stressful, just a conversation to gauge where we're beginning. Relief flickered across Jackson's face. He's been in his workshop since dawn. I'll tell him to expect you at 2. After Jackson left, Eleanor stood in the center of the cottage, overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances. Just a week ago, she'd been opening yet another rejection letter, wondering how much longer she could afford her apartment. Now she was employed, housed, and facing a challenge that would demand everything she had to give. She ran her fingers along the empty bookshelves, imagining them filled with her books. The poetry collections David had given her each anniversary, the literary criticism that had formed the backbone of her dissertation, the novels that had kept her company during long, lonely nights after his death. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt a spark of excitement about the future. By 1:30, she had unpacked enough to feel settled and had changed into fresh clothes. She grabbed her messenger bag, filled with notebooks, reference materials, and her laptop, and headed toward Ethan's workshop. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. The path from the cottage to the workshop took her past beds of Texas wildflowers, blue bonnets, Indian paintbrush, and Mexican hat, all nodding with raindrops. Beyond them, the pastures stretched toward distant hills, dotted with grazing cattle. When she reached the workshop, Eleanor paused, hearing the same Tchaikovsky from her previous visit. She knocked firmly. The music stopped abruptly, followed by the scrape of a chair. Ethan opened the door, his expression guarded but curious. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His dark hair was combed, and he wore a clean button-down shirt instead of the faded T-shirt from their first meeting. "You're early," he said, but stepped aside to let her enter. "Punctuality is a virtue I hope to instill," she replied with a slight smile. The workshop was less chaotic than before, with materials organized and surfaces cleared, another sign of preparation that touched her more than she expected. "Your father said you've been here since dawn," Eleanor observed, setting her bag on a clean table. Ethan shrugged. "I don't sleep much." "Something we have in common," she said, unpacking a few items. "Though I'm trying to break the habit. The mind needs rest as much as stimulation. Is that what today is? Stimulation?" There was a note of challenge in his voice, but curiosity too. Eleanor pulled out a notebook and pen. "Today is about getting to know each other. I need to understand where you are academically, what interests you, and how you learn best." She met his gaze directly. "And you need to figure out if you can trust me enough to learn from me." This blunt assessment seemed to catch Ethan off guard. He blinked, then gestured to the violin on its stand. "Do you play?" "No," Eleanor admitted. "Piano was my instrument, but it's been years." "Mom played violin," Ethan said, his voice softer. "She tried to teach me when I was little, but I didn't have the patience. After she got sick, I decided to learn." He ran his fingers along the polished wood without picking it up. "Dad says I'm pretty good now, but he doesn't know much about music." The mention of Sophia offered an opening. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said gently. "What kind of teacher was she?" Ethan's expression grew distant, as though looking into the past. "She never made me feel stupid for asking questions, even when I asked the same ones over and over." He picked up a small robot from a nearby shelf, clearly handmade, with visible circuit boards and carefully soldered connections. "She taught me to build this when I was 7. We worked on it for months." "It's impressive," Eleanor said honestly. "It doesn't do much, just follows simple commands." He set it down carefully. "But she let me figure out most of it myself. She'd give hints when I got stuck, but never just told me the answer." "That sounds like good teaching to me." Ethan met her eyes, his gaze suddenly intense. "Are you going to leave too?" The question, so direct and vulnerable, caught Eleanor off guard. "Do you mean like the other tutors?" "Like everyone." There was a wealth of hurt beneath the words. Not just the tutors who'd come and gone, but the mother who had left him through. No choice of her own. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "I can't promise to stay forever, Ethan, but I can promise not to leave simply because things get difficult." She paused. "And I can promise to be honest with you, always." He studied her face, searching for deception. "We'll see," he said finally. But something in his posture had relaxed slightly. For the next 2 hours, they talked about books he'd read, subjects that excited him, topics he found tedious. Eleanor took notes but kept the conversation casual, steering away from anything that felt like a formal assessment. Ethan's knowledge was impressive, but uneven, advanced in areas that interested him, surprisingly basic in others. "You've never had consistent science instruction," she observed, after he struggled to explain basic cell biology, despite his evident mastery of physics concepts. Ethan shrugged. "The last tutor was obsessed with literature and history. The one before that was a math guy who tried to cram calculus down my throat." "And the regular schools?" "Boring. They wanted me to sit through material I already knew to get to the few. In parts I didn't." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need a comprehensive curriculum that builds on your strengths without neglecting the fundamentals." She closed her notebook. "But not today. This was just to get acquainted." "Did I pass?" Ethan asked, only half joking. "This wasn't a test," Eleanor assured him. "But if it was, you'd have done very well." A hint of pride crossed his face before he suppressed it. As they wrapped up, Jackson appeared at the workshop door. "How did it go?" he asked, his question directed at both of them. "Acceptable," Ethan said while studying nonchalance, but there was a lightness to his step as he gathered his things. "Dr. Mitchell doesn't think I'm a complete lost cause." "High praise indeed," Jackson replied dryly, but his eyes held gratitude. When they met Eleanor's, "We'll start formally tomorrow," Eleanor said. "I'd like tonight to finalize the curriculum based on our conversation." "Will you join us for dinner?" Jackson asked. "Mrs. Ramirez makes excellent chili." The invitation felt significant somehow, as though accepting it would mark a shift from employee to something more integrated into the household. Eleanor hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that. Thank you." That evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Eleanor found herself seated at the large dining table in the main house. The kitchen smelled of spices and cornbread, and Mrs. Ramirez moved efficiently, serving the meal with practiced ease. "Teresa has been with us since Ethan was born," Jackson explained. "She's part of the family." The older woman smiled warmly at Eleanor. "It's good to have another woman in the house," she said, squeezing Eleanor's shoulder before returning to the kitchen. Dinner conversation flowed more naturally than Eleanor had expected. Ethan, while still reserved, seemed less adversarial than during their previous interactions. He asked about her time at Columbia, about New York City, about authors she'd studied. "David, my husband, and I lived in a tiny apartment in Washington Heights," she told them. "We could barely afford it, but we were so excited to be there. We'd sit on the fire escape on summer evenings and talk about the future." "What did he do?" Jackson asked. "He was working on his PhD in environmental science," Eleanor replied, the familiar ache of loss present but muted. "We met in the graduate library. He knocked over my stack of research materials, then insisted on buying me coffee to apologize." "Were you angry?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. Eleanor smiled at the memory. "Furious. Those books had taken me hours to locate. But he was so genuinely remorseful that I couldn't stay mad. And he had this way of looking at the world, finding wonder in the most ordinary things that I found—" She trailed off, suddenly aware of how personal the conversation had become. "Magnetic," Jackson supplied quietly. Sophia was like that. Could find beauty in places most people never thought to look. Their eyes met briefly in shared understanding before Eleanor glanced away. After dinner, Ethan excused himself to finish an assignment for his online physics course. Jackson invited Eleanor to join him on the back porch, where comfortable chairs overlooked the property now gilded by the setting sun. "He likes you," Jackson said, handing her a glass of iced tea. "I can tell." "How?" "He hasn't tried to scare you off yet." A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. "The snakes in Mr. Peterson's car appeared on day 2. Eleanor laughed. "I'm not afraid of snakes or teenagers." A formidable combination of fearlessness. Jackson settled into the chair beside her. "Thank you for today, for agreeing to take this on." "Don't thank me yet," Eleanor cautioned. "We've only just begun." They sat in companionable silence, watching as fireflies began to emerge in the gathering dusk, their tiny lights blinking among the wildflowers. "May I ask you something personal?" Jackson said finally. "You can ask. I might not answer." He smiled at her forthrightness. "Why haven't you left Riverbrook? After your husband passed away, I mean. There couldn't have been much keeping you there." The question struck at something Eleanor had asked herself countless times. "Initially I stayed because leaving felt like another loss. David and I had planned to build a life there, have children there." She took a sip of tea, gathering her thoughts. "Later, I stayed out of inertia, I suppose. And fear." "Fear of what?" "Of starting over, of failing, of forgetting." She glanced at him. "Grief becomes familiar after a while, comfortable in its way." Jackson nodded slowly. "Like an old jacket with holes in it. Not adequate, but yours." "Exactly." Eleanor was struck by how easily he understood. "But eventually, you need a new jacket. Is that what this is? Your new jacket?" "Perhaps," she admitted, "or just a step toward finding one." Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Ramirez, who came to ask Jackson about arrangements for a delivery expected the next day. When he excused himself to handle the matter, Eleanor remained on the porch, watching as stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. What was she doing here? This place, these people, they were all strangers just days ago. Yet something about the Diamond Bee felt right in a way no place had since David's death. Not because it resembled her old life, it couldn't be more different, but because it offered purpose, challenge, the chance to make a difference in a brilliant young life. And if she was honest with herself, there was something compelling about Jackson Blackwell too. Not romantically, she wasn't ready for that and doubted he was either, but a connection forged in shared experience. They were both navigating the aftermath of devastating loss while trying to build something meaningful from what remained. When Jackson returned, they talked about the practical aspects of Ethan's education, the schedule she proposed, resources she needed, expectations for progress. In this, Jackson proved both generous and pragmatic, agreeing to her request for materials while setting clear parameters around Ethan's existing commitments. By the time Eleanor returned to the cottage that night, stars were scattered across, the sky like diamonds on black velvet. The air carried the scent of rain-washed earth and distant sage. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking not about the past, her usual evening companion, but about the future. About equations that needed solving, books that needed reading, a wounded boy who needed reaching, and the quiet rancher who trusted her to try. For the first time in 3 years, Eleanor fell asleep looking forward to morning. The next day established the pattern that would govern their lives in the weeks to come. Eleanor arrived at the learning center at 8:30 to prepare, and Ethan appeared at 9, neither enthusiastic nor resistant, simply present and watchful. "We'll start with an overview of our approach," Eleanor began, gesturing to a chart she'd created outlining the curriculum she proposed. Each day will include core subjects, mathematics, science, literature, and history, but we'll approach them through integrated projects rather than isolated lessons. Ethan studied the chart with evident skepticism. This looks like a lot. It is, Eleanor acknowledged, but it's designed to build connections between subjects rather than treating them as separate boxes. For instance, when we study the scientific revolution in history, we'll also read literature from that period and explore the mathematical and scientific principles they were discovering. And if I already know some of this stuff, then we'll go deeper, not skip ahead. There's always more to understand, more connections to make. Ethan considered this, then nodded reluctantly. What's first? Assessment, Eleanor said, producing a series of exercises, not standard tests, but open-ended problems that required applying knowledge in various ways. I need to know precisely where you are in each area, not to judge, but to plan effectively. To her surprise, Ethan tackled the assessments without complaint, seemingly intrigued by their unconventional nature. As she observed him work, Eleanor noted not just his answers, but his process, where he hesitated, where he showed confidence, which problems engaged his interest and which he rushed through. By lunchtime, a pattern had emerged. Ethan's mathematical thinking was exceptionally advanced, but his writing lacked structure. His scientific knowledge was strong in physics, but spotty in biology and chemistry. His grasp of historical events was solid, but he struggled to understand their broader significance and interconnections. Over sandwiches in the Learning Center's small kitchen area, Eleanor shared her observations. You're used to learning facts and solving problems, but not necessarily synthesizing information or expressing complex ideas clearly. So? Ethan shrugged, but she could tell he was listening. So we'll work on both. The knowledge you're acquiring is only useful if you can apply it, connect it to other knowledge, and communicate it effectively. Dad just wants me to stop getting kicked out of school. Perhaps, Eleanor conceded, but I suspect what he really wants is for you to develop into the best version of yourself, someone who can use his considerable gifts to make a positive difference in the world. Ethan snorted. Now you sound like a greeting card, and you sound like someone deflecting because the conversation is getting uncomfortable, Eleanor countered, but kept her tone light. A flash of surprise crossed Ethan's face, followed by reluctant respect. Fair point. After lunch, they moved to literature, with Eleanor introducing a novel she'd selected based on their previous discussions, Flowers for Algernon, by Daniel Keyes. It's about a man with an intellectual disability who undergoes an experimental procedure to increase his intelligence, she explained. As he becomes smarter, he realizes that intelligence without emotional understanding is ultimately hollow. Sounds depressing, Ethan commented, but accepted the book. Many great books are. They help us process difficult truths in safe ways. They spent the afternoon reading the first chapters together, pausing to discuss the narrative technique, the ethical questions raised, and the protagonist's evolving perspective. To Eleanor's satisfaction, Ethan engaged deeply with the text, asking thoughtful questions and offering insightful observations. By the end of their first full day, a tentative truce had been established. Ethan hadn't fully dropped his guard, but he had participated willingly in everything Eleanor proposed. For her part, Eleanor had confirmed what she'd suspected. Beneath the boy's defensive armor lay a mind hungry for genuine challenge and connection. As Ethan packed up his things, he paused at the door. This was not terrible, he admitted. Grudgingly, Eleanor smiled. From a 14-year-old boy who had driven away 4 previous tutors, this constituted high praise indeed. I'll see you tomorrow, Ethan. We're just getting started. After he left, Eleanor remained at her desk, reviewing her notes and planning the next day's lessons. She didn't hear Jackson enter until he spoke. So, he said from the doorway, How was day one? Eleanor looked up, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, but it was the good kind of exhaustion that comes from meaningful work. Promising, she replied. Very promising. The smile that spread across Jackson's face carried relief, gratitude, and something else, a warmth that reached his eyes and momentarily transformed his usually guarded expression. Then we have something to celebrate, he said. Would you join us for dinner again? As dusk settled over the Diamond B and the first stars appeared in the Texas sky, Eleanor realized that for the first time in years, she was exactly where she wanted to be. The weeks unfolded into a rhythm. At the Diamond B mornings found Eleanor and Ethan in the learning center. Afternoons often took them outdoors for hands-on projects, and evenings increasingly included dinner with Jackson, where conversation flowed more freely with each passing day. October arrived with a subtle shift in the Texas landscape. The oppressive summer heat gave way to crisp mornings and golden afternoons. Wildflowers that had withered in August's sun now enjoyed a second blooming, dotting the pastures with splashes of purple and yellow. On this particular Friday, Eleanor had planned something special. After 3 weeks of steady progress and increasingly less resistance from Ethan, she decided it was time to push boundaries. We're going on a field trip, she announced as Ethan arrived at the learning center. The boy paused, his backpack half slung over one shoulder. Where? The creek that runs through the east pasture. Bring your notebook and something to collect. Specimens. Ethan's curiosity visibly piqued. What are we collecting? You'll see. Eleanor handed him a small digital microscope that connected to a tablet. I've already cleared it with your father. 20 minutes later, they stood at the creek's edge. Paul had transformed the landscape, with cottonwoods along the waterway turning brilliant gold against the blue Texas sky. The water ran clear over smooth stones, creating gentle pools where minnows darted in flashes of silver. Our environmental science unit starts today, Eleanor explained, kneeling by the water's edge. What better way to begin than by studying the ecosystem in your own backyard? For the next 2 hours, they collected water samples, documented aquatic insects, and took soil samples from the bank. Eleanor guided Ethan through proper scientific observation techniques, but let him direct much of the investigation. This reminds me of something David would do, she said absently as they examined a water sample under the microscope. Your husband? Ethan asked, looking up from the tablet screen where magnified microorganisms swirled. Eleanor nodded, surprised she'd spoken. The thought aloud, he was passionate about water ecology. Whenever we visited somewhere new, the first thing he'd do was collect samples from local waterways. Did he find anything cool? Once, in a stream in the Catskills, he discovered a species of aquatic insect that wasn't supposed to be in that region. The memory made her smile. He was so excited, he called his advisor at midnight. Ethan considered this. You miss him a lot, don't you? The question, asked with such directness, momentarily caught Eleanor off guard. Ethan rarely ventured into personal territory. Yes, she answered honestly. Every day. Does it get easier? The real question beneath his words was clear. Their hope that the pain of losing his mother would eventually diminish? Eleanor chose her words carefully. Not easier, exactly. Different. The grief changes shape. In the beginning, it's so huge you can't see around it. Eventually, it becomes something you carry with you, rather than something that carries you. Ethan nodded, his gaze returning to the tablet. Mom would have liked this, he said after a moment. She was always trying to get Dad to let me explore the creek, but he worried I'd fall in or something. He loves you very much, Eleanor said gently. Sometimes fear and love get tangled together. He doesn't need to be afraid. I'm not a little kid anymore. Parents often have trouble adjusting to that reality. She smiled. Perhaps we should invite him next time. He's always busy with the ranch. You might be surprised. Eleanor had noticed that Jackson made time whenever Ethan was involved, regardless of ranch demands. Let's finish our collection and head back. We can analyze these samples more thoroughly. In the lab, as they gathered their materials, Eleanor spotted movement at the edge of the tree line, a white-tailed deer and her fawn, cautiously approaching the water. She touched Ethan's arm gently and pointed. They stood motionless, watching as the deer dipped her head to drink, the fawn mimicking her movements with gangly grace. The moment held a quiet magic that neither felt the need to break with words. When the deer finally sensed their presence and bounded away, Ethan turned to Eleanor with a rare, unguarded smile. "That was awesome," he said simply. Back at the Learning Center, they spent the afternoon analyzing their samples, creating detailed diagrams of the creek ecosystem, and discussing the interdependencies they'd observed. Ethan's engagement was complete, asking questions, suggesting hypotheses, making connections to their readings. "This reminds me of something we discussed in our history lesson about the Dust Bowl," he said as they documented the effects of soil erosion on the creek bank. "How human activity upstream can have huge consequences downstream." Eleanor nodded, pleased at the connection. Exactly. Ecosystems and human societies both operate as interconnected webs. Pull one thread and the entire structure shifts. As they finished for the day, Eleanor handed Ethan his copy of Flowers for Algernon, which they'd been reading throughout the week. "Final chapters this weekend. We'll discuss it on Monday." Ethan took the book, his expression thoughtful. "I think I know how it's going to end. It's not going to be happy, is it?" "Not in a conventional sense," Eleanor admitted. "But sometimes the most valuable stories aren't the ones with happy endings. Because real life doesn't always have happy endings. Because real life is complex. And learning to find meaning in complexity is part of growing up." Ethan nodded, surprisingly accepting of this truth. As he packed his backpack, he paused. "Dr. Mitchell, thanks for today. The creek thing, it was cool." The simple gratitude meant more to Eleanor than elaborate praise might have. "You're welcome, Ethan. Have a good weekend." After he left, Eleanor remained in the Learning Center, updating her progress notes. Ethan's academic improvement was clear, his writing more structured, his analysis more nuanced, his scientific observations more precise. But the more significant change was in his engagement. The defensiveness that had characterized their early interactions had gradually given way to genuine participation. She was so absorbed in her notes that she didn't hear Jackson enter until he spoke. "Successful field trip." Eleanor looked up, startled but pleased to see him. "Very. Ethan has a natural aptitude for scientific observation." Jackson leaned against the doorframe, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "He came to my office before heading to his workshop, actually initiated a conversation about what you two did today. That hasn't happened in—" he shook his head, "a very long time." "He's opening up," Eleanor said, slowly but steadily. "Thanks to you." Jackson's gaze was warm with gratitude. "He's doing the work. I'm just creating the opportunities. Don't underestimate your impact." Jackson straightened, as if remembering why he'd come. "I actually wanted to ask a favor. Something's come up, a situation with one of our breeding bulls that requires my attention tomorrow. I need to postpone our weekly progress meeting until Sunday. Would dinner tomorrow be an acceptable alternative, say 7 o'clock? These weekly meetings had become a highlight for Eleanor, a chance to discuss Ethan's progress in depth and plan adjustments to his curriculum. They typically took place over coffee in Jackson's office, strictly professional, despite the growing ease between them. "Dinner would be fine," she agreed, ignoring the slight flutter in her stomach at the change in routine. "Your house or the cottage?" "I thought perhaps a change of scenery," Jackson suggested. "There's a restaurant in Crestview, Benjamin's. Nothing fancy, but the food is good, and we'd have privacy to discuss Ethan's progress. Eleanor hesitated only briefly. There was nothing inappropriate about discussing her student over dinner, yet it felt like crossing some invisible line. Still, Jackson's expression was open, his request reasonable. "That sounds good," she said finally. 7 o'clock. Saturday evening arrived with unexpected butterflies in Eleanor's stomach as she changed clothes for the third time. The simple black dress she finally settled on was one of the few nice things she'd brought from Riverbrook. Modest but flattering, appropriate for a professional dinner, yet nicer than her typical teaching attire. "This is a work meeting," she recalled her reflection as she applied a touch of lipstick. Nothing more. Jackson arrived precisely at 7, driving not his usual ranch truck, but a sleek charcoal sedan. He'd changed as well, Eleanor noticed. Dark jeans and a crisp button-down beneath a tailored sport coat. His hair was still slightly damp from a recent shower, and he'd shaved, the clean scent of his aftershave detectable in the confined space. "Of the car, you look nice," he said as she settled into the passenger seat, the comment offered casually but with genuine appreciation. "Thank you, so do you." The drive to Crestview took 30 minutes, their conversation flowing easily between ranch matters, Ethan's progress, and the autumn weather. Eleanor found herself relaxing, enjoying the rare opportunity to leave the ranch and the comfort of Jackson's company. Benjamin's proved to be a charming establishment, a converted Victorian house with intimate dining rooms and a menu featuring locally sourced ingredients. The host led them to a table in a quiet corner, where a small vase of wildflowers and the soft flicker of candlelight created an ambience decidedly more romantic than Eleanor had anticipated. "I hope this is all right," Jackson said, seemingly reading her thoughts as they settled at the table. "Benjamin's is one of the few places nearby where we can have a conversation without half the county listening in." "It's lovely," Eleanor assured him, though she couldn't quite ignore the way several other diners glanced their way with curious eyes. Over appetizers, they discussed Ethan's academic progress, his improved writing, his growing engagement with scientific concepts, his thoughtful analysis of their literature selections. Jackson listened attentively, asking perceptive questions that revealed how closely he monitored his son's education despite his demanding schedule. "The Creek Project was particularly inspired," he commented. "Ethan mentioned you compared ecosystem, interdependencies, to historical events you've been studying. He made that connection himself," Eleanor clarified. "That's what I've been hoping for, not just learning facts, but seeing the relationships between different fields of knowledge." Their main courses arrived, locally raised beef for Jackson, grilled trout for Eleanor, and the conversation shifted. Subtly, Jackson asked about her doctoral work, showing genuine interest in her academic background. Eleanor found herself explaining her dissertation with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. "The repetition of trauma in narrative structure fascinates me," she explained, gesturing with her fork for emphasis. "How writers use patterns to communicate experiences that resist direct expression, like grief," Jackson suggested. "Exactly. Some emotions are too complex for straightforward narration. Literature finds alternative ways to convey them. Through echoes," Jackson said thoughtfully. "Patterns that resonate." Eleanor looked at him with surprise. "Yes, that's precisely it. I'm not entirely illiterate," he said with a slight smile. "Sophia made sure our home had as many books as cattle." The mention of his late wife would once have cast a shadow over their conversation. Tonight, it felt more like acknowledging a presence that would always be part of his life, just as David would always be part of hers. "Tell me about her," Eleanor said gently. "Ethan mentions her sometimes, but always in fragments." Jackson was quiet for a moment, rotating his water glass slowly. "She was brilliant," he finally said, "an architect by training, but her mind worked across disciplines. She could discuss quantum physics at breakfast and Renaissance art at dinner. Sounds intimidating, Eleanor smiled. It could be, he admitted, but she had this way of making complex ideas accessible without simplifying them. That's what made her an extraordinary teacher for Ethan. He looked up, meeting Eleanor's eyes. She would have liked you. The simple statement carried unexpected weight. I think I would have liked her too, Eleanor replied softly. As dinner progressed, their conversation moved beyond Ethan, beyond their professional relationship, into territories. More personal, Jackson spoke of his childhood on the ranch, the expectations that came with being the heir to 3 generations of Texas ranchers, his decision to expand beyond cattle into sustainable agriculture. Eleanor shared stories of her New England upbringing, her early love of books, her journey through academia. By the time dessert arrived, a shared slice of pecan pie with homemade vanilla ice cream, Eleanor had nearly forgotten the official purpose of their dinner. The ease between them felt natural, the connection undeniable. "May I ask you something personal?" Jackson said as the waiter poured coffee. "Of course. Are you happy at Diamond B?" There was a vulnerability in the question that caught Eleanor. By surprise, yes, she answered without hesitation. Happier than I've been in a very long time. Even with the isolation, the distance from town, from people your own age. Eleanor considered this. I was far more isolated in Riverbrook, surrounded by people, than I am here. She met his gaze directly. "Why do you ask?" Jackson set down his coffee cup carefully. "Because I'm concerned about the position I've put you in. You've changed Ethan's life and mine for the better, but I wonder sometimes if it's fair to keep you so removed from the world, from opportunities you might have elsewhere." "I'm exactly where I want to be," Eleanor said firmly. Something shifted in Jackson's expression, relief perhaps, or something deeper. "I'm glad to hear that." The drive back to the ranch was comfortably quiet, the Texas night sprawling above, them in a canopy of stars impossible to see from more populated areas. As they turned onto the ranch road, Jackson broke the silence. "Thank you for tonight, for the conversation, for everything you're doing for Ethan." "It's my job," Eleanor said, but they both knew it had become much more than that. When they reached the cottage, Jackson walked her to the door. The night air was crisp with autumn, carrying the scent of sage and distant wood smoke. Eleanor turned to say goodnight and found him standing closer than she'd expected, his expression unguarded in a way she'd rarely seen. "Eleanor," he said, her name sounding different somehow in his voice. Then he seemed to catch himself, taking a small step back. "Good night. I'll see you on Monday." "Good night, Jackson." Inside the cottage, Eleanor leaned against the closed door, her heart beating a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. Dangerous territory, this gentle thawing between them, complicated by their professional relationship, by Ethan's needs, by the ghosts that still haunted them both. Yet as she moved through her evening routine, Eleanor couldn't deny the warmth that had kindled within her, not just attraction, though that was undeniably part of it, but a deeper recognition. Jackson Blackwell understood loss in a way few others could. He valued education and intelligence rather than finding them threatening. And despite his reserved exterior, he loved, with a depth and constancy evident in every interaction with his son. Dangerous territory indeed. But perhaps, Eleanor thought as she drifted towards sleep, worth exploring nonetheless. Monday morning arrived with an unexpected disruption. Eleanor had just finished preparing the day's materials when Mrs. Ramirez appeared at the Learning Center door, her expression troubled. "Dr. Mitchell, Mr. Blackwell asked me to let you know that Ethan won't be joining you this morning. There was an incident over the weekend." Eleanor set down the book she'd been holding. "What kind of incident? Is Ethan all right?" "Physically, yes." Mrs. Ramirez hesitated. "He snuck out Saturday night, took one of the ATVs, and went to a party in town with some older boys. Mr. Blackwell found him at 3 in the morning walking back along the highway. There was alcohol involved. Eleanor's concern deepened. This behavior seemed out of character for the Ethan she'd come to know. Where is he now? Confined to his room. Mr. Blackwell is... She searched for the word. Upset. I'd like to speak. With Mr. Blackwell, if possible. Mrs. Ramirez nodded. He's expecting you. In his office. Eleanor found Jackson at his desk, reviewing papers with the intense focus he applied to all ranch matters. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral, but with tension evident in the set of his shoulders. I heard about Ethan, she said without preamble. Mrs. Ramirez told you? Some of it. Is he all right? Jackson sighed, setting down his pen. Physically, yes, though he could have been killed driving that ATV in the dark, especially after drinking. What exactly happened? He connected with some boys in town through an online gaming group. Older boys, 16, 17. They'd been pressuring him to meet up. Saturday night, after you and I left for dinner, he waited until Mrs. Ramirez was asleep and took one of the ranch ATVs into town. Jackson's jaw tightened. They were drinking, smoking. When I found him, he could barely walk straight. Eleanor processed this information, trying to understand the sudden regression in Ethan's behavior. Has he said why? He's not saying much of anything. Just that he wanted to hang out with people his own age for once. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I've restricted his internet access, taken away his phone, and confined him to his room except for meals. May I speak with him? Jackson hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea right now. He needs to understand there are consequences for his actions. I agree, Eleanor said carefully. But isolation might reinforce exactly what drove him to this behavior in the first place: loneliness, desire for peer connection. He has peers. There are youth programs in town, supervised activities, which he hasn't shown interest in, Eleanor pointed out gently. Jackson, 14 is a difficult age. Brilliant or not, Ethan craves acceptance from people his own age. The more we restrict that, the more he'll seek it in potentially harmful ways. Jackson's expression remained troubled, but he nodded slowly. What do you suggest? Let me talk to him. Maintain the consequences, but perhaps we can channel his social needs in more positive directions. She hesitated, then added, and maybe we should consider adjusting his education plan to include more peer interaction. After a moment's consideration, Jackson agreed. He's in his room. I'll walk you up. Ethan's bedroom was on the second floor of the main house, a space Eleanor had never seen before. When Jackson knocked, then unlocked the door, she was struck by the contrast between the workshop's creative chaos and the bedroom's meticulous order. Bookshelves lined one wall, a desk. Beneath the window held a computer, now unplugged, and a telescope stood in one corner. The walls featured framed star charts and architectural drawings, perhaps his mother's work. Ethan sat on his bed, a copy of Flowers for Algernon open beside him. His expression shifted from defiance to surprise when he saw Eleanor. I'll leave. You two to talk, Jackson said, the tightness in his voice conveying both concern and restraint. 30 minutes, Dr. Mitchell. When the door closed, Eleanor took the desk chair, turning it to face Ethan. So, she said calmly, you had quite an adventure Saturday night. Ethan's defiance returned. Come to lecture me too? No, I came to understand. She met his gaze directly. Help me understand, Ethan. The simple request, free from judgment, seemed to catch him off guard. His defenses wavered, then crumbled. I just wanted to be normal for once, he said, his voice smaller than she'd ever heard it. To hang out with kids my age without them thinking I'm a freak. And did these boys make you feel normal? He shrugged, picking at a thread on his comforter. For a while. Until they started making fun of where I live, how my dad keeps me locked up like Rapunzel. He looked up, his expression raw with hurt and confusion. "They only invited me because I told them I could bring alcohol from Dad's liquor cabinet." Eleanor's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry, Ethan. That must have been disappointing. Dad doesn't get it. He thinks I should be happy just studying and working on projects. He doesn't understand what it's like to be different from everyone. Have you told him that? He doesn't listen. He just gets that look, like I'm this problem he has to solve." Eleanor considered her next words carefully. "Your father loves you very much, Ethan. Sometimes love makes people overprotective, especially when they've already lost someone important to them." She leaned forward slightly. "What you did was dangerous, not just breaking rules, but putting yourself at risk. That deserves consequences." Ethan looked away. "I know, but I also think your need for friendship with people your own age is valid. Perhaps we can find a better way to meet that need." "Like what? There's no one like me around here." "Perhaps not exactly like you," Eleanor agreed, "but there are other bright, curious young people. What about the astronomy club at the high school? In Crestview? Or the robotics competition team?" A flicker of interest crossed Ethan's face before skepticism returned. "Dad would never let me join now." "He might with the right structure and supervision." She stood to leave. "Think about it. We'll talk more when your restriction ends." At the door, Ethan called after her. "Dr. Mitchell, I finished the book." Eleanor and turned back. "And?" "It's sad, but I get why you wanted me to read it, about intelligence not being the only thing that matters." She nodded, pleased by his insight despite the circumstances. "We'll discuss it when you return to lessons. Keep thinking." Outside Ethan's room, she found Jackson waiting in the hallway, his expression questioning. "He's a teenager," Eleanor said simply. "A gifted one, yes, but still a teenager with teenage needs. Social connection is as important to his development as academic stimulation," Jackson sighed. "I know. I just don't know how to provide that without exposing him to this kind of situation." "We'll figure it out," Eleanor promised. Together, November arrived at the Diamond B with frost-covered mornings and the rich gold of late autumn. Ethan had completed his 2-week restriction with minimal complaint, surprising both Eleanor and Jackson with his acceptance of the consequences. Upon his return to lessons, he threw himself into his studies with renewed focus, as though trying to prove something, to his father, to Eleanor, perhaps to himself. The incident had catalyzed changes in their approach. After lengthy discussions, Jackson had agreed to Eleanor's proposal. Ethan would join the Crestview High robotics team, which met twice weekly after school. Jackson himself would drive Ethan to and from these meetings, gradually allowing more independence as Ethan demonstrated responsibility. Today marked Ethan's 3rd robotics session, and Eleanor used the afternoon to catch up on assessment paperwork in the Learning Center. The November sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across her desk as she reviewed Ethan's latest writing assignment, an analysis comparing Flowers for Algernon with Plato's allegory of the cave. His insights were remarkably sophisticated, his writing more structured than it had been 2 months ago. A knock at the door interrupted her concentration. She looked up to find Jackson leaning against the doorframe, his expression uncharacteristically light. "How was robotics?" she asked, setting aside her work. "Enlightening." He entered the room, pulling up a chair across from her desk. "The team is designing an autonomous robot for the regional competition in February. Ethan's been put in charge of programming the navigation algorithms. That's quite a responsibility." "He's thriving with it," pride warmed Jackson's voice. "The faculty advisor pulled me aside today, said Ethan has natural leadership abilities that are beginning to emerge. Apparently, he helped one of the other team members troubleshoot a coding problem that had them stumped for weeks. Eleanor smiled, remembering how Ethan had initially described his teammates as decent for regular kids. A backhanded compliment, but progress nonetheless. The social interaction is good for him, she observed. He needs peers who can challenge him, even if it's just in specific domains. You were right, Jackson admitted, about the balance he needs. I was so focused on his academic development and keeping him safe that I neglected the social component. You were doing your best, Eleanor said gently. Parenting doesn't come with a manual, especially for exceptional children. Jackson nodded, his gaze drifting to the bulletin board where Eleanor had posted samples of Ethan's work. Sophia used to say that raising Ethan was like trying to direct a river. You can build channels, but ultimately you have to respect the power of the current. His expression grew thoughtful. I forgot that for a while after she died, tried to dam the river instead. These moments, when Jackson spoke openly about Sophia, about his grief and uncertainty, had become more frequent in recent weeks. Eleanor treasured them, not just for the trust they represented, but for the window they provided into the man beneath the reserved exterior. Speaking of rivers, Jackson continued, shifting topics, I have a proposal. Ethan's birthday is next weekend. No, he mentioned wanting a telescope upgrade. Already ordered, Jackson confirmed with a slight smile. But I was thinking of something additional. The weather forecast is unusually warm for this weekend. What would you think about a camping trip to the North Ridge? There's a spot overlooking the river valley that was special to Sophia. She used to take Ethan there when he was younger. A camping trip, Eleanor repeated, surprised by the suggestion. Just overnight, Saturday to Sunday. Ethan's been asking to return there for years, but He hesitated. I haven't been ready. It felt too much like her place. The unspoken question hung between them. Would Eleanor's presence make it easier or harder for Jackson to revisit this place of memory? Are you sure you want me along? She asked carefully. It sounds like a meaningful opportunity for father-son. Bonding? Ethan specifically asked if you would come, Jackson clarified, and I thought... He paused, seeming to choose his words deliberately. I thought it might be good. For all of us. Something in his tone made Eleanor's pulse quicken slightly. Then I'd be happy to join you. Excellent. Jackson stood, his businesslike demeanor returning. We'll leave after breakfast on Saturday. I'll have Mrs. Ramirez prepare supplies. As he left, Eleanor found herself contemplating the significance of this invitation. Over the past weeks, the boundaries of their relationship had gradually shifted. Dinner together had become a regular occurrence rather than a special event. Their conversations increasingly strayed from Ethan's education to personal territories. Books they'd read, ideas they were exploring, quiet confidences about their lost spouses. Nothing improper had occurred. No lines had been crossed, yet Eleanor couldn't deny the growing current between them, a connection that went beyond professional respect or the bond of shared purpose in Ethan's education. The question was whether either of them was ready to acknowledge it, let alone act upon it. Saturday morning dawned clear and unseasonably warm, with temperatures forecast to reach the mid-70s by afternoon. Eleanor packed lightly. A change of clothes, sturdy boots, the new paperback she'd been saving for a quiet moment. She'd been camping precisely once in her life, on a disastrous graduate school outing where it had rained continuously for 3 days. This experience promised to be considerably more pleasant. Ethan was practically vibrating with excitement when she joined them at the main house. He'd already loaded his backpack with what appeared to be an entire library of astronomy guides, a high-powered flashlight, and various electronic devices of mysterious purpose. Dr. Mitchell, did Dad tell you about the ridge? There's practically zero light pollution. We can see the Andromeda galaxy with just binoculars. His enthusiasm was contagious. Eleanor helped Mrs. Ramirez pack food supplies while Jackson loaded camping equipment into his truck. By 9 o'clock, they were bumping along a rough trail that wound through the northern section of the ranch, an area Eleanor hadn't yet explored. The landscape changed as they drove, becoming more rugged and dramatic. Rolling pastures gave way to limestone outcroppings and stands of juniper and oak. The trail climbed steadily, eventually reaching a plateau where Jackson parked. "We'll hike the rest of the way," he explained, shouldering a pack that looked impossibly heavy. About a mile to the campsite, the November sun was warm on their backs as they hiked, Ethan ranging ahead on the trail and then doubling back with reports of interesting rocks or animal tracks. Eleanor found herself enjoying the physical exertion, the fresh air filling her lungs and bringing color to her cheeks. "You're a good hiker," Jackson observed, as they climbed a particularly steep section. "I wasn't sure if you'd done much of this. My hiking experience is limited to the manicured trails of New England state parks," Eleanor admitted with a laugh. "But I'm discovering I enjoy it. The Diamond Bee has miles of trails. Some I haven't explored myself." He glanced at her, a hint of invitation in his eyes. "There's a waterfall on the western boundary that's spectacular after spring rains." "I'd like to see that," she said, and meant it. The campsite, when they reached it, took Eleanor's breath away. Set in a clearing near the edge of the ridge, it offered a panoramic view of the valley below, where the river curved like a silver ribbon through the landscape. The Diamond Bee's main complex was visible in the distance, buildings reduced to miniature. "By perspective, this is magnificent," she breathed. "Mom called it the Eagle's Nest," Ethan said, dropping his pack and moving to the ridge edge, "because you can see everything from up here, like a bird of prey." "Sophia discovered it when we were first married," Jackson explained, as he began setting up the tent, a spacious canvas structure large enough for all three of them, with separate compartments for privacy. "She was exploring the property on horseback and got caught in a thunderstorm. Took shelter in that cave." He pointed to a small opening in the limestone cliff face just beyond their campsite. "She said the lightning illuminated the entire valley," Ethan continued, clearly repeating. A story he'd heard many times. "And when the storm passed, the stars came out so bright she felt like she could touch them." Eleanor helped unpack the supplies, noting how this shared memory seemed to join father and son, bridging the gap that had grown between them. For once, Sophia's absence felt not like a wound, but like a presence, a shared foundation rather than a void. They spent the afternoon exploring the ridge. Ethan led them to a natural limestone arch he and his mother had discovered years ago. Jackson pointed out native plants, demonstrating a knowledge of the land that went beyond mere ownership. Eleanor found herself slipping naturally into their dynamic, asking questions, sharing observations, contributing her own knowledge where relevant. As the sun began its descent, they returned to the campsite. Jackson built a fire in the stone ring while Ethan arranged logs around it for seating. Eleanor helped prepare a simple meal, foil-wrapped potatoes and vegetables to cook in the coals, steaks to grill over the open flame. "This beats Mrs. Ramirez's cooking," Ethan declared as they ate, the food flavored by smoke and fresh air. "Don't let her hear you say that," Jackson warned with a smile, "or we'll all be eating oatmeal for a week." Darkness fell quickly once the sun disappeared behind the western hills. The temperature dropped, but the fire kept them warm as the stars emerged, first a few bright pioneers, then a cascade, until the entire sky blazed with light. "Oh my," Eleanor whispered, tilting her head back. Growing up in suburban New England, then living in New York and small-town Texas, she'd never seen stars like this, so numerous they seemed to merge into luminous clouds in places. Ethan had set up his telescope at the edge of the campsite and was making minute adjustments to its position. "Come see Saturn," he called. "The rings are visible tonight." Taking turns at the eyepiece, they observed the ringed planet, then moved on to star clusters and nebulae as Ethan enthusiastically guided their celestial tour. His knowledge was impressive, his passion genuine. This, Eleanor realized, was Ethan at his best, sharing what he loved, teaching rather than being taught. Eventually, the boy's energy began to wane. Despite his protests, his yawns became more frequent, his explanations less detailed. Time for sleep, Jackson decreed after Ethan's third massive yawn. The stars will still be there tomorrow night. But not in the same configuration, Ethan argued, though he began packing up his telescope. A valid astronomical point, Eleanor conceded with a smile. But your father's right. Rest now. Stargaze later. After Ethan retired to the tent, Eleanor and Jackson remained by the fire. The night had grown chilly, and Eleanor wrapped a blanket around her shoulders as she gazed into the dancing flames. "Thank you for including me," she said, after a comfortable silence. "This place is special." "I can see why Sophia loved it." Jackson nodded, adding a log to the fire. "I avoided coming here after she died. Too many memories." He looked up at the star-filled sky. "But being here now, with Ethan, with you, it feels right somehow, like she would approve." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Eleanor felt a tightness in her throat, a complexity of emotion she couldn't immediately untangle. "Jackson," she began carefully, "I need to ask something. Anything. What is this?" She gestured between them. "These past weeks I've felt—" She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the shift in their relationship. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his gaze returning to the fire. "I've asked myself the same question," he finally said. "When Sophia died, I never imagined feeling—" He searched for the word, "connection with someone else. I threw myself into the ranch, into raising Ethan, convinced myself that chapter of my life was closed." He looked at her then, his expression unguarded in the firelight. "But then you arrived at the Diamond Bee, challenged my son. Challenged me. Made me see possibilities I'd stopped believing in." Eleanor's heart quickened at his words. "I wasn't looking for this either," she admitted. "After David died, I thought that part of me had died too." She drew the blanket tighter, around her shoulders. "I came here for a job, a chance to use my education, nothing more. And now I find myself looking forward to our conversations, thinking about you when we're not together, caring about what happens to you, to both of you, in a way that goes beyond professional concern." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Jackson reached across the space, his hand finding hers in the firelight. His touch was warm, solid, real. "I care about you too, Eleanor, more than I expected, more than I thought possible." His voice was low, earnest. "But there are complications. Ethan, your position, the grief we both still carry. I know." She turned her hand to clasp his properly. "I don't have answers, just questions and feelings that have grown too strong to ignore." "Perhaps we don't need all the answers tonight," Jackson suggested. "Perhaps it's enough to acknowledge what's happening and give ourselves permission to explore it, slowly, carefully." Eleanor nodded, relief and anticipation mingling in her chest. "I'd like that." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, the fire crackling between them, and the vast Texas sky wheeling above. No dramatic declarations, no passionate embraces, just the quiet recognition of something fragile and precious taking root between two people who had thought such possibilities were behind them. Eventually, the fire burned low. They banked it for the night and retreated to their separate compartments in the tent, where Ethan's soft snores provided a gentle soundtrack to Eleanor's thoughts as she drifted towards sleep. Morning arrived with golden light and birdsong. Eleanor emerged from the tent to find Jackson already up, brewing coffee over a small camp stove. The valley below was shrouded in mist that would burn away with the rising sun, creating a dreamlike landscape of islands and clouds. "Sleep well?" he asked, handing her a steaming mug. Surprisingly, yes. She accepted the coffee gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. A small contact that now carried new awareness. "It's beautiful here in the morning," they shared. A smile of quiet understanding before Ethan burst from the tent, hair tousled and eyes bright with excitement about the day ahead. The morning passed in hiking and exploration, with Ethan leading them to a series of small caves in the limestone cliff. By noon, they were packing up the campsite, preparing for the return to the main ranch. "I wish we could stay longer," Ethan said as he reluctantly dismantled his telescope setup. "We can come back," Jackson promised. "Perhaps make it a monthly tradition when the weather permits." As they hiked back to the truck, Eleanor found herself walking beside Jackson while Ethan ranged ahead on the trail. "You seem different here," she observed. "More relaxed." "I feel different," he admitted. "Being away from the ranch, even just overnight, provides perspective." He glanced at her. "And the company helps." The drive back was companionable, with Ethan chattering about future camping trips and astronomical events they could observe from the ridge. By the time they reached the main house, the normal rhythm of ranch life reasserted itself. Mrs. Ramirez with questions about the week's menu, a ranch hand with an update on a pregnant heifer, messages that had accumulated in Jackson's absence. Eleanor excused herself to return to the cottage, needing time to process the weekend's developments. As she unpacked her bag, her phone chimed with a text message, the first Jackson had ever sent her outside of logistical communications about Ethan's schedule. "Thank you for this weekend. For everything. Dinner tomorrow night?" She typed her reply, smiling at the flutter in her stomach that made her feel like a much younger woman. "I'd like that. And thank you too." Setting down her phone, Eleanor moved to the cottage window. The diamond bee spread before her, bathed in late afternoon sunlight. When she'd arrived here months ago, it had felt like foreign territory, a temporary way station in a life derailed by loss. Now somehow it has begun to feel like home. Whatever was developing between her and Jackson would require careful navigation. Ethan's needs remained paramount. The grief they both carried would not simply vanish. But for the first time in years, Eleanor found herself looking toward the future with hope rather than resignation, not just for herself, but for all three of them. Her gaze tracked to the north, where the ridge they'd visited was just visible on the horizon. Sophia's special place had now become part of her story too, a waypoint marking the moment when healing truly began. Tomorrow would bring lessons with Ethan, ranch responsibilities for Jackson, the 100 small tasks that comprise their daily lives. But something fundamental had shifted during that night beneath the stars, a recognition that the heart's capacity for love wasn't limited or depleted by loss, but could expand to embrace new possibilities. For now, that recognition was enough. As December descended upon the diamond bee, the landscape transformed. Frost etched delicate patterns on the cottage windows each morning. The distant hills took on a bluish hue in the crisp winter air. Inside the learning center, Eleanor and Ethan worked with renewed purpose, racing to complete their semester objectives before the holiday break. "The robotics competition is in 8 weeks, Ethan reminded her as they reviewed his project timeline. "We need to finish the navigation algorithms by next Friday." Eleanor nodded, impressed by his commitment. The robotics team had become Ethan's anchor, a place where his intellect was valued, but where he also had to develop social skills and teamwork. The sullen, defensive boy she'd met in September had gradually given way to a more confident, engaged young man. "We'll adjust your schedule," she assured him. "Your science project can wait until January." Their academic routine had evolved organically over the months. Mornings were devoted to core subjects, mathematics, literature, writing, and history. Afternoons now included collaborative projects, independent research, and twice-weekly robotics meetings. Ethan's curriculum remained challenging, but now incorporated his growing interests while ensuring comprehensive coverage. More significantly, the Diamond Bee itself had become their classroom. They studied ecology in the creek basin, physics through the mechanics of ranch equipment, and history by researching the region's development from indigenous territory to modern ranching operations. Dr. Mitchell? Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Can I ask you something? Of course. He fidgeted with his pencil, uncharacteristically hesitant. Are you and my dad, you know? Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks. The developing relationship between her and Jackson hadn't been publicly acknowledged, though they'd been careful not to hide it either. Over the past weeks since the camping trip, they'd shared dinners both at the ranch and in town, long conversations on the porch, and increasingly more personal confidences. Nothing improper had occurred. They'd both agreed to move carefully, but the connection between them was undeniable. Your father and I have become close friends, she said carefully. We enjoy each other's company. It's okay if it's more than that, Ethan said, surprising her. I'm not a little kid. Eleanor studied him, noting the sincerity in his expression. How would you feel if it were more than friendship? Ethan considered this with the same thoughtfulness he applied to complex equations. It was weird at first. After Mom, I never thought Dad would be interested in anyone else. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. But he's different when you're around. Less serious. He laughs more. The observation touched Eleanor deeply. Your dad cares about you more than anything in the world, Ethan. Nothing will ever change that. I know. He shrugged, attempting nonchalance, though his next words carried emotional weight. And besides, Mom would have liked you. You don't let people get away with being lazy thinkers. She was like that too. The comparison to Sophia, offered freely without prompting, felt like a precious gift. Eleanor reached across the table and briefly squeezed Ethan's hand. Thank you for telling me that. The moment was interrupted by Jackson's arrival at the learning center door. His expression brightened, seeing them together, unaware of their conversation. Productive day? He asked. Very, Eleanor replied, hoping her flushed cheeks weren't obvious. Ethan's making excellent progress on his navigation algorithms. Good timing, Jackson said. I just got off the phone with Dr. Abernathy from the University of Texas. He's agreed to visit the ranch next week to observe Ethan's work and discuss potential early admission programs. Ethan straightened, excitement flashing across his face. Seriously, its robotics program is incredible. Dr. Abernathy was impressed by your project proposal, Jackson confirmed. No promises, but he's interested in meeting you. As Ethan enthusiastically outlined his plans to showcase his work, Eleanor marveled at the transformation in both Blackwell men. Jackson had gradually released his protective grip, allowing Ethan appropriate independence while maintaining necessary boundaries. Ethan, in turn, had begun to channel his intellectual gifts constructively, developing the social and emotional skills that would serve him throughout life. We should celebrate, Jackson declared. Dinner in town tonight? Can we go to Antonio's? Ethan asked. The robotics team is meeting there for pizza after practice. Jackson glanced at Eleanor, silently consulting. They both recognized the significance of Ethan's request, his desire to socialize with peers, rather than avoid them. I think that can be arranged, Jackson agreed. Dr. Mitchell? I'd love to, she replied, smiling at the ease that had developed between the three of them. Later that evening, after Ethan had joined his teammates at a crowded table across the restaurant, Eleanor and Jackson sat in a quiet corner booth of Antonio's pizzeria. The casual Italian restaurant buzzed with Friday night energy, families sharing meals, high school students celebrating the approaching winter break, locals catching up over pasta and wine. He's thriving, Eleanor observed, watching Ethan gesticulate enthusiastically as he explained something to his teammates. "Thanks to you," Jackson said, his gaze warm as it rested on her. "We both know it's not that simple," she countered gently. Ethan needed the right environment, the right challenges, the right balance of structure and freedom. "You provided those. I just helped clarify the approach." Jackson shook his head, a slight smile playing at his lips, always deflecting praise. "Professional hazard," she replied, returning his smile. "Educators learn to celebrate their students' achievements rather than take credit for them." Their conversation drifted to plans for the upcoming winter break. Eleanor had initially assumed she'd return to Riverbrook for the holidays, but Jackson had invited her to remain at the Diamond Bee. "Christmas at the ranch is special," he explained. "We cut our own tree from the north section. Mrs. Ramirez makes traditional Mexican dishes alongside Sophia's Swedish family recipes. There's a small candlelight service at the ranch chapel on Christmas Eve." "It sounds wonderful," Eleanor said honestly, though a shadow of old grief touched her. The holidays had been difficult since David's death. Empty celebrations in her apartment, forced cheerfulness that only emphasized her solitude. Jackson seemed to read her thoughts. "Sophia loved Christmas," he said quietly. "The first holiday after she died, I nearly cancelled everything. Couldn't bear the thought of traditions without her." His expression grew distant with memory. "Ethan was only 8. He came into my office on December 1st with a handmade calendar, something he and his mother had always created together. He'd made it himself that year." Eleanor's heart tightened at the image of a young Ethan, holding on to traditions in the wake of devastating loss. "What did you do?" she asked softly. I realized that continuing our traditions wasn't betraying her memory. It was honoring it. Jackson met Eleanor's gaze. "Grief changes shape over time. Eventually it makes room for joy again if you let it." His words resonated deeply. Eleanor had been allowing grief to define her existence for 3 years, measuring each experience against what she'd lost, rather than what might still be possible. "I'd love to spend Christmas at the ranch," she decided. "Thank you for including me." Later, as they drove back to the Diamond Bee beneath a canopy of winter stars, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been reading yet another rejection letter, her advanced degrees seemingly worthless, in a town that viewed her intellect with suspicion. Now she was helping shape a brilliant young mind, building a meaningful life and opening her heart to possibilities she'd thought forever closed. The irony wasn't lost on her. Being too educated had closed doors in Riverbrook, but had opened this one, the most significant opportunity of her life after David's death. When they reached the cottage, Jackson walked her to the door, as had become their custom. The December night was cold, their breath forming clouds in the air between them. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and earnest in the darkness, "these past months with you here, they've changed everything. For Ethan, for me too." She acknowledged. "I know we agreed to move slowly," he continued, "and I respect that, but I want you to know that He paused, searching for words. "I'm falling in love with you. I didn't expect it, didn't think it was possible after Sophia. But here we are." The simple declaration hung in the crisp night air. Eleanor felt a surge of emotion, joy mingled with the bittersweet awareness that love after loss carried its own complexity. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, the words both frightening and freeing. "I've been fighting it, afraid of what it means, afraid of forgetting." "Not forgetting," Jackson corrected gently. "Remembering differently, carrying the past while embracing the future." He reached for her then, his hand warm against her cheek. Their first kiss was tentative, a careful exploration of new territory. When they drew apart, Eleanor saw in Jackson's eyes the same mixture of wonder and vulnerability she felt herself. No promises were made that night, no dramatic declarations or detailed plans, just the quiet acknowledgement of genuine connection between two people who had faced profound loss and found, in each other and in the brilliant, complicated boy who connected them, a reason to believe in second chances. As Eleanor closed the cottage door behind her, she thought of the rejection letters that had seemed so devastating months ago. Sometimes, she reflected, life's greatest gifts arrived disguised as disappointments. The path that had led her to the Diamond B, to Ethan and Jackson, hadn't been the one she would have chosen. But standing here now, with her heart opening to new possibilities, she couldn't imagine any other destination. Spring came to the Diamond B in a riot of colour. Blue bonnets carpeted the meadows, transforming the landscape into a sea of azure. The creek ran full and clear with winter runoff, and new calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the pastures. 6 months had passed since Eleanor first drove up the ranch's long gravel driveway, uncertain of what awaited her. Now, as April sunshine warmed the earth, she stood at the window of her cottage, no longer simply a place of employment, but a home filled with books, memories, and hopes for the future. Today marked a significant milestone. Dr. Abernathy from the University of Texas was returning to the ranch, this time with the dean of the School of Engineering and formal paperwork for Ethan's early admission program. At 15, Ethan would begin taking university courses in the fall, while continuing some of his education at the ranch under Eleanor's guidance, a hybrid approach that recognized both his exceptional intellect and his need for ongoing social-emotional development. The robotics competition in February had proven pivotal. Ethan's team hadn't won the state championship, placing third instead, but his leadership and innovative navigation algorithms had caught the attention of university recruiters. More importantly, the experience of working toward a common goal, facing setbacks, and celebrating achievements with peers had accelerated Ethan's personal growth in ways pure academic study never could. A knock at the cottage door interrupted Eleanor's reflections. She opened it to find Ethan standing on the porch, dressed in the blue button-down shirt and khakis he reserved for special occasions. "Dad sent me to get you," he said, a mixture of excitement and nervousness in his voice. "The UT people are early." "You look very professional," Eleanor noted as they walked together toward the main house. Ethan tugged at his collar. "Dad made me iron this shirt twice." "Nervous?" she asked. "A little." He shrugged with attempted nonchalance. "It's weird to think about being on a college campus next year. The other students will be so much older." "Chronologically, yes," Eleanor agreed, "but you've demonstrated that you're ready for this academically, and you'll still have your home base here." They paused at the edge of the garden that separated the cottage from the main house. In the past months, Eleanor had helped Ethan plant native wildflowers there, a project that combined botany lessons with physical activity and aesthetic appreciation. "Dr. Mitchell." Ethan's voice had grown serious. "Can I ask you something important?" "Of course. When Dad asks you tonight, you should say yes." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Ethan rolled his eyes in quintessential teenage fashion. "Come on, I'm not blind. He's got Mom's ring-sized. He's been practicing some speech in his office when he thinks no one can hear." Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks. She and Jackson had grown steadily closer since their December declaration, but marriage hadn't been explicitly discussed. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. "Ethan, if your father is planning to ask me something like that, I would. Never make such a decision without considering how you feel about it. I know." His expression softened. "That's why I'm telling you now. It's okay with me. More than okay." He hesitated, then added with surprising vulnerability, "You make him happy, and you make things better here, for both of us. Emotion tightened Eleanor's throat. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." Before the moment could grow awkward, Ethan gestured toward the main house. "We should go. Dad's probably freaking out by now." The meeting with the university representatives went seamlessly. Dr. Abernathy and Dean Parker were clearly impressed by Ethan's portfolio of work and his articulate responses to their questions. The early admission program they proposed would allow Ethan to take engineering and computer science courses at UT while maintaining his connection to the ranch. The fall semester would begin with 2 courses, gradually increasing as Ethan demonstrated his readiness. "This is a unique opportunity," Dean Parker explained to Jackson. "Ethan will have access to university resources and faculty mentorship while still benefiting from the individual attention Dr. Mitchell provides. The best of both worlds." Jackson nodded, pride evident in his expression, as he watched Ethan confidently discussing robotic sensing systems with Dr. Abernathy across the room. "It's exactly the balance we've been working toward. Challenge without isolation." "If I may say so," Dean Parker added quietly, "your son is fortunate to have such thoughtful educational advocates. Many gifted children fall through the cracks, either pushed too hard academically without emotional support, or held back by systems that don't recognize their potential." "The credit belongs largely to Dr. Mitchell," Jackson replied, his gaze finding Eleanor across the room. "She helped us find a path that honors Ethan's gifts without defining him solely by them." After the university representatives departed, promising to send final paperwork the following week, the 3 of them celebrated with an impromptu picnic. By the creek, Mrs. Ramirez packed a basket with fried chicken, potato salad, and her famous peach cobbler. The April sunshine was warm but not hot, perfect for a late afternoon outdoors. To new beginnings, Jackson proposed a toast with sparkling cider. "And to teamwork," Eleanor added, smiling at Ethan. "None of this happens without collaboration." Ethan raised his glass. "And to not be normal," he said with a grin. "Overrated anyway." Later, as the sun began its descent, Ethan excused himself to work on a coding problem, leaving Eleanor and Jackson alone by the creek. They sat side by side on a blanket, shoulders touching comfortably, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "I'm proud of him," Jackson said, "not just for the university acceptance, but for how he's grown as a person. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined him confidently discussing his future with strangers." "He's remarkable," Eleanor agreed, "and resilient. He's faced significant challenges and emerged stronger. Like his teacher." Jackson turned to face her, taking her hand in his. "Do you realize today marks exactly 6 months since you first came to the Diamond Bee? Half a year has changed everything." Eleanor smiled, remembering that first uncertain meeting in Maggie's diner. "From job interviews to life transformation. Not what either of us expected, I think." "Life rarely follows our expectations," Jackson observed. "Sometimes it offers something better instead." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Which brings me to something I've been wanting to ask you." Though Ethan had prepared her, Eleanor's breath still caught at the sight of the box. Jackson opened it to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by small diamonds. "This was my grandmother's," he explained. "Sophia always loved it, but preferred her own simpler band. I hoped you might appreciate its history, its connection to this land and family." "It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, touching the deep green stone gently. Jackson took a deep breath. "Eleanor Mitchell, these past months have shown me that love doesn't diminish when shared. It multiplies. Loving you doesn't reduce what I felt for Sophia, just as loving me doesn't dishonor David's memory. Instead, we've created something new, together, something that honors our past while embracing our future." His eyes held hers steadily. "Will you marry me?" Become part of this family officially, though you've been in our hearts for months already? Eleanor's vision blurred with tears, not of grief this time, but of joy and possibility. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." As Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor thought of the journey that had brought her here, the pain of loss that had seemed insurmountable, the rejection letters that had felt like personal failures, the chance meeting that had led her to this place, these people who had become her family. Being too educated had closed doors in Riverbrook, but had opened this one, the most important door of her life. Her knowledge had found purpose in guiding Ethan. Her heart had found healing in Jackson's steady affection. Her grief had transformed into gratitude for second chances. That evening, as they shared their news with an already suspiciously well-informed Ethan, Eleanor reflected on life's unpredictable paths. She had come to the Diamond Bee as a widow deemed too educated for a small town's comfort. She would move forward as part of a family that valued her precisely for the qualities others had rejected: her intelligence, her forthrightness, her depth of understanding. "To our family," Jackson proposed another toast at dinner, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders, Ethan beaming opposite them. "To our family," Eleanor echoed, the words feeling right, feeling true. Outside the windows of the ranch house, the Texas sky blazed with stars, the same stars that had witnessed their camping trip, their first acknowledgement of feelings, their gradual journey toward each other. Below them, the Diamond Bee stretched in all directions, a landscape that had become not just a setting, but a character in their story, a place of healing, growth, and second chances. Eleanor Mitchell, soon to be Eleanor Blackwell, had found her home not in spite of being too educated, but because of it. In this unexpected place, with these extraordinary people, her knowledge had become not a liability, but a gift, one that had transformed 3 fractured lives into a family built on understanding, resilience, and love. Some doors close so that better ones can open. Some endings clear the path for more beautiful beginnings. And sometimes, the very qualities the world rejects become the foundation for a life more meaningful than you ever dared to imagine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.